Greetings, Whisky folk. Welcome back to the official Dram Association YouTube channel. My name is Adam Bradshaw, and it is an absolute pleasure to welcome to the Strat Studio for the first time in one of these videos. This is Whisky 101 with the man, the myth, the legend, Norm the IT guy.
Hello, everyone.
He exists. He's real. He's not just a name in the chat.
I'm the IT guy, and I'm real.
Yeah? I mean, I feel like I should be quizzing you on IT things now just to make sure you're who you say you are, but...
Well, I owe you one for allowing me to learn more about whiskey, and
hey, you teach me about networks, I'll teach you about whiskey. This is good.
Done.
All right, so Norm is relatively new to the whiskey scene, so he is my perfect partner for these Whisky 101 videos, where we're going to be exploring some of the crucial questions about whiskey. Yes. So Norm's been watching these videos, and that's pretty much your only introduction, right? You've had a couple of tastings. I've let you into the studio after hours, and you've tried a couple of whiskeys. But,
yes.
And you've got a favorite already.
Well, what is the name? The one. Well, I bought the black label from one of your videos before.
The black bottle. The black bottle.
The black bottle is the one that I went out and I purchased that one because I didn't want to spend a lot of money when I don't know what I'm doing, and then I come to work and I ask you questions.
and that's a good pro tip. Black bottle is a fantastic beginner whiskey for that. Someone who wants a quality whiskey without spending hundreds of dollars. Black bottle's about $40, if that.
It was in the $30 range.
And it's a great bottle for that. Plus, you get a free glass right now too, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to be asking the big questions in this series, and there's no bigger question than simply, what is whiskey? And it's kind of an unanswerable question, right? Because whiskey, historically and in the modern times, it really comes down to two things. It's made of grain, it's distilled from grain, and it's aged. And after that, it all gets very murky depending on where you are. Different parts of the world have completely different laws, completely different rules. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. Like in Scotland, 3 years. 3 years has to be the minimum, has to be aged in oak specifically in Scotland for 3 years. Australia, 2 years. Why not? In Japan, whiskey, to be called Japanese whiskey, can contain whiskey from outside Japan, and you can still call it Japanese whiskey, so long as it's got some Japanese whiskey in there. In India, you can call it whiskey even if only some of it is whiskey and the rest is actually white rum.
See, it gets confusing.
It's mad, right? None of it makes any sense.
No.
And even right here in Canada, we have this many pages of what whiskey is in the official laws, and it's mad. Like it doesn't, like there's so many rules and regulations, and some of them contradict each other, and so even here in Canada, we're not quite sure what whiskey is. So we're actually going to ask a different question. And I've not seen anyone else ask this question before. We're going to ask, what isn't whiskey? So I've got 3 drams right here for Norm, and we're going to discuss whether each one is or isn't a Canadian whiskey.
Okay.
All right? Sound good?
That sounds
So we're
good.
going to start with the one on the left there.
One on the left here.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, is there a proper way of sniffing this, or?
Well, this one, I will give you a clue, is cask strength, so you probably don't want to do what I just did and stick your whole nose in, because it might make your eyes water.
Well, yeah. I just did it to find out
I know, right?
what not to do.
What not to do, ladies and gentlemen. Don't do that. When tasting and nosing a whiskey, the big thing, especially when you're just starting out, don't overthink it. It's not one of those things, like you go to some master classes, and quite rightfully, like a lot of like master blenders and master distillers will have a way that they always do it for consistency. So that they always approach a whiskey in the same way, and they'll teach people in their master classes how they do it. And like I had one guy who's like, you start it at arm's length and you gradually get it closer, sniffing all the time. And like it takes half an hour. It's ridiculous, and then you got to swirl it 5 times clockwise and 3 times. Now, at the end of the day, if you want to smell a whiskey, you put it towards your nose and you smell it. And that's really all there is to it.
So whatever you feel comfortable with is what you do.
And some people, like depending on how sensitive your nostrils are, some people need to smell from over here. Some people need to stick the whole damn nose into it.
So if you get that, whoa, and I just spilled it all over you.
That's quite all right.
Sorry about that.
The best thing about whiskey is it evaporates quite quickly.
My first flub up. See, unexperienced whiskey drinker.
Hey, you've not even had a sip yet.
So if I start getting the burn of alcohol, then I'm too deep, too far in.
Yeah,
just back off a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're finding that your nose is starting to go numb as well, that's another sign. But one other thing is, if you do feel like you've gone too far, there's a couple of ways to reset your nose. And this is a big trick. Familiar senses. So one trick is, here, just smell a glass of water. It doesn't really smell like anything, but it actually will help reset your senses so that when you go back to the whiskey, you can potentially...
Ooh, there is a difference there.
Right. Another thing, if you don't have a glass of water handy, which is bad form, you should always have a glass of water handy at a whiskey tasting, is to smell your inner elbow. There's no more familiar smell than yourself.
Oh, I smell nice.
Oh, good. So smelling yourself, weirdly, as weird as that can sometimes look in a public setting, is a perfectly valid way of resetting your senses. Especially, I say senses, your smell, really. Yeah, I don't very much recommend licking yourself to reset your palate. It might work, but I don't know, it just feels a little one step too far, maybe.
Right.
So on the nose of this one, I'm getting quite a lot of sort of caramel and baking spice. You in that kind of realm?
The caramel yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I smell chocolate or something, or
chocolate, nice.
Coffee, maybe.
Yeah, deep dark flavors. That makes a lot of sense for what this is.
That's my other problem, is that I'm just not familiar with the taste. Like they talk about peat. I'm not exactly sure what peat tastes like.
Fair.
I'd have to look it up to find out exactly what it is, and I don't think I've ever tasted burnt soil or...
Yeah, very few Canadians have chewed on peat.
So when you say peat, I have no reference point.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good news is there's no peat in these. Very rare to have a peated Canadian whiskey. Although they do exist.
And there's no hard rule about flavor notes. This is just what your personal thing. And then when people are talking about notes, it's just what they're getting out of it. It's a personal thing. Absolutely. And then you can agree or disagree. It's not like, well,
yeah,
you're not picking up on the, so get out of the club.
See, true. So that's a very important point, because not only is everyone's palate individual, everyone's frame of reference is individual as well. So although two people might be tasting exactly the same chemical compound, which there's so many chemicals in whiskey, you might be picking out different ones anyway. But say two people are picking exactly the same chemical compound. To one person, it might taste like a very specific type of apple that they used to eat a lot of as a child. But if the other person's never had that specific type of apple, they might be finding it in cucumber skin, right?
Right.
It could be the same chemical compound, but from completely different areas that they're picking it up from. And also, two people who have had the exact same apple probably have different memories of it, because as you're probably aware with other things that you remember, sometimes you don't remember them exactly how they were, and your memories will warp over time. So sometimes I'll have a whiskey and I'll be tasting something and going, oh yeah, that tastes exactly like the kind of salted licorice I had as a kid. And then I'll go and have some salted licorice the week after, and I'm like, this tastes nothing like that whiskey.
Right.
All right. Memories will warp and change over time. So every single time you take a sip of whiskey, it is an absolutely unique individual experience. Yeah. And I know this is one of those romanticized, sort of slightly bullshitty kind of things, but I often refer to whiskey as nostalgia in a glass. That is what it is to me. It's memories locked up in a little liquid time vault.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
The question is, though, is this whiskey? It smells like a whiskey, tastes like a whiskey, and that's the thing. Everything we're going to have here today smells and tastes like a whiskey. So you flip a coin, there's a random chance whether it's a whiskey or not. Because that's the point of this game.
I can, and when you see, I like watching your videos, and if I have, like, when I was doing the black bottle, I watched it 3 or 4 times over again. And when you're doing your tasting notes, then I would taste it, and then I don't know if it's subliminal or it sets your memory off, but then I sort of, I do taste that now. And then I try it again. Oh, I do taste that now, right?
Totally, yeah. Yeah, oftentimes the hardest thing with tasting whiskey is not actually tasting it, but being able to put words to it. So sometimes you need just a little bit of a nudging in a certain direction or a reminder of a certain flavor, and you go, oh yeah, that's exactly what's going on in here, right?
So that's why you add tasting notes to your thing. So then you give like sort of a reference point for people to build on.
So it's not necessarily we're telling people like if we have a tasting note written on a bottle of burnt caramel and dried figs, it's not that we're actually expecting everyone that tastes this to find burnt caramel and dried figs. It's just a place to start. Right. You could taste it and go, well, I'm not really getting like the figs, but maybe more towards a date or some kind of thing. It's not really caramel, but I don't know, maybe like a custard or a fudge. So I mean, there are certain tasting notes though that will show up in a lot of whiskeys, and they're tasting notes that are sort of I usually refer to them as the slap in the face tasting notes. Like if you have a peated whiskey, you're gonna taste smoke most of the time, right? If you're having a first fill bourbon cask whiskey, you're gonna taste vanilla, because vanillin, the actual chemical compound that is vanilla, is a very, very strong part of American oak. In fact, when you make fake vanilla, they use it by soaking water in American oak.
Really?
Yeah, it's fake vanilla flavoring. It's vanillins. It's exactly what makes a lot of whiskeys taste like vanilla.
Huh.
So that's one of those slap-in-the-face flavors, which I would say whenever a whiskey I find has a lot of that, 90% of people who drink it will probably find it. Or higher even. Yeah. Same with sherry casks. If you get a really, really active sherry cask, you'll probably taste the sherry. Or it might come across as like dried fruit. Maybe raisins, sultanas.
Right.
And that is like a slap in the face of a flavor. It's hard to miss.
Right.
But if you do miss it, that's just you. It's fine. Nothing wrong with that. See, my pants were already dry.
Well, sure.
The beauty of whiskey, ladies and gentlemen. So what do you think, Norm? Whiskey or not whiskey?
Well, I'm going to have to say that it is, because although it's different than the black bottle, that's where I'm coming from, because that's pretty much the only bottle of whiskey, although I've barely touched it. I don't drink a whole lot, but this is a way smoother. It's lighter than that. Mm-hmm. The black bottle is a little stronger.
Yep.
And it is like a caramel apple kind of deal. A lot of the smell. So I really like it, actually. This one is quite nice.
The interesting thing about this whiskey is that the ingredients aren't that dissimilar to black bottle, in the sense that black bottle is a blended Scotch whiskey, which means it's a blend of Scottish grain whiskey and Scottish malted barley whiskey. And malted barley is one of the main ingredients of this whiskey, with some other grains. So it's the same kind of idea. The weird thing about this is, although it's very much Canadian, it's made here in Canada, it's actually made much more similar to an American whiskey, where they produce something called a mash bill. And what that means is they take the different grains, the different ingredients, and they mix them together and then make the beer out of it and then distill it. And this whiskey is not a whiskey. This is actually the Divine Ancient Grains Strath Exclusive Single Cask Number 1. So I'm going to put that right in front of the camera for you guys to see for a second there. This is a whiskey that is sold out worldwide. This is actually bottle 68 of 68, which I kind of find fun. I've also got bottle 1 of 68 at home.
Oh, nice.
It's kind of cool, yeah. So this is a particularly neat whiskey, because I helped to choose this whiskey, but it's made right here in town. It's made at a little distillery called Divine out in Saanich. Ken Winchester, I believe, was the distiller of this. Although, yeah, it probably was Ken, because it's done a couple of years ago. Not entirely sure. But yeah,
I've seen these bottles around. Not the Pacific label, but these guys are at craft fairs a lot around town as well.
Nice. And of course, with the catnip table, you've probably come across a lot of distilleries at craft fairs.
Yeah.
So the big difference with this one is it's a black label. Normally they're white labels. We've sort of inverted it because this is a special edition that's exclusive to us.
Right.
One fun thing about this exact bottle, or bottling rather, this exact edition, won a gold medal at the Canadian Whisky Awards earlier this year. Right?
Excellent.
Which is kind of cool, which puts it in the upper echelon of Canadian whiskies, which is really, really neat and kind of looks good on us. You could only ever get it at the Strath. Again, it is completely 100% sold out. The good news is we actually have a second edition, which is very, very similar.
I'm going to enjoy this one without you.
It's all right, though. If you really like it, there's a second edition that's out now that's very similar. And if the Canadian Whisky Awards happen in 2021, who knows if they will or not. We're going to be entering that, and if it doesn't get a gold, I'll be surprised.
Now, is there a way to the proper way of sipping it? I've seen people on the videos, a little bit of the air in your mouth, or swish it around a little bit.
Both of those things are actually from the wine world, and I find them to be more of a deficit for whiskey, because what it does is it makes the alcohol evaporate off, and then you're tasting the alcohol, you're capturing the alcohol in your mouth. I don't know that you necessarily want to do that. It's like there was one guy who always said, when smelling a whiskey, you put your hand over it, give it a big swirl, and then do that. You do that, you're just making the alcohol evaporate off quicker, and all you're smelling is fumes.
Right. Yeah. Right. I want to get past the alcohol taste.
Exactly.
And into what makes the whiskey unique in itself, right?
Yeah. And one way to do that is by adding a little water as well.
Right. Yes.
Which is something, especially with this one, which is 58.2% ABV. So it's almost a whiskey and a half, really. Yes. Most whiskeys are around 40, which is the legal minimum here in Canada and in Scotland. 40% has to be at least 40. Really? In Australia, 37, I believe, just to be different. It has to be at least 40% to be considered a whiskey. So this one's really interesting. It's mostly organic BC barley, but then they actually add einkorn, emmer, spelt, and Khorasan into the mix, which are 4 ancient sort of ancestral grains. I think they're actually ancestors of wheat that they grow. I think they grow all 4 of them on the farm now as well, which is kind of cool. So yeah, it's a really neat, avant-garde, completely one-of-a-kind whiskey. They refer to it as an alt whiskey. And it's not technically a whiskey because it's only a year old.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, if you're making it yourself and it has a Strath label, like you're a time traveler, or it has.
Well, they'd already distilled it. We just chose the casks.
Oh.
So they didn't specifically distill it for us. We just chose some particularly good casks because they release an ancient grains that they water down to 46, I think. We just chose some particularly good casks to release at cask strength.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it is special to us then.
It is special to us, but we didn't order it before it was distilled. We chose it from their stocks. Yeah.
What did the whiskey crew get together and sample a bunch of things and
it was actually myself. Who else was actually up there? Myself and Kristen, my girlfriend, and the former whiskey buyer for the Strath, Pat Dunlop, who is now the head bartender at the Union Club.
Right.
And my colleague at the time, Emily, I believe, came with us.
Oh, nice.
If I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Which was quite a good trip. Yeah, good cask. And yeah, the second cask is honestly a little bit different, but just as good. I'm getting a lot of coffee on the nose now, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes me feel good.
So the one bizarre thing,
I got a right note.
The one bizarre thing about this whiskey is if you look at the color, like this is a year old, so how did it get so much color? The color of a whiskey comes from the wood. When you have a new whiskey, it's completely clear, it looks like vodka.
Right.
All of the color comes from the wood. So if it's only 1 year old, how come it's so rich in color? The answer is in the type of cask and also the size of cask. This was distilled in a fresh virgin American oak cask, which means it's never been used for anything else before. It was built, it was charred, it was filled with this spirit. It was also a very, very small cask. A cask so small that I actually have one of them as my side table next to my bookcase at home.
Oh, really?
I think 30, maybe 50 litre cask, I think this one was. Actually, how many bottles? 68 bottles. So yeah, I think it was a 50 litre cask, which is not very big. No. Because of the smaller cask, there's actually then more surface area. The whiskey is touching more wood. The bigger the cask, the less surface area.
Yeah,
weird. Yeah, it takes a second for your head to click into the realization of, that makes sense, but yeah.
It'd be, the dimensions of it, I could see that.
It's kind of weird. So yeah, more interaction with the wood because smaller cask. Kind of neat. So yeah, divine ancient grains, not a whiskey. Tastes like a whiskey, smells like a whiskey, looks like a whiskey, wins awards like it's a whiskey, but technically not a whiskey.
Just because it's not aged. Now, if you kept this on the shelf in the bottle for another 10 years, would it be a whiskey then?
Good question. No, it wouldn't.
It has to be in the cask.
So let me find the exact thing in the official government documents about aging whiskey. It's one of these damn pages. Whiskey aging. Age means the period during which an alcoholic beverage is kept under such conditions of storage as may be necessary to develop its characteristics, flavour, and bouquet, which in whiskey means wood.
Right.
And they actually specify small wood, which also has an official government thing, means wood casks or barrels not greater than 700 litres capacity.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sitting in the glass, it's not changing its profile.
No, I mean, it might oxidate a little, so the flavour might change a little, but that's different to maturing.
Right.
It's not going to mature any. That's a very good point. Weirdly enough, in Canadian whiskey, though, it does allow an inert period in between. This is a mad thing that I just discovered like 2 days ago, which is just one more thing of how complicated and weird the idea of what is whiskey is. In Canada, if you had a 2-year-old whiskey, it was spent 2 years in a cask, and then you put that cask into a plastic container or a bottle or whatever for, I think it's up to 9 months. It might only be 6 months, but somewhere around there. Say 6 months, and then you put it back into wood for another 6 months. You can call that a 3-year-old, even though it didn't actually spend all 3 years in the oak. You're allowed a certain amount of percentage in an inert container.
Right.
Which is weird. It's really weird, and that's a bizarre quirk in Canadian whiskey that doesn't really make any sense.
Now, and this, since it's is there like a rule for a new cask? Can like a Scottish do a new cask without be whiskey there, or do they have to use older casks? Because there's
yeah, you can use any cask you like. It's just about how much time the spirit is spent in a cask.
I would take it some of these casks are worth money.
Some of them are, yeah.
If you've got a real nice 100, 200-year-old cask that...
Well, that's the thing. Casks do get tired. So you don't want a really, really old cask, because at a certain point it will stop giving up its flavour. The wood is spent. So even in Scotland, where really old Scottish whiskies, if you're a distiller and you know that the whiskey you're putting into a cask is going to be in there for 30, 40 years, you want a not overly active cask. Because if you put that into a really active cask, it's going to be over oaked. It's going to taste like bitter tea by the time it comes out in 30, 40 years. You want a particularly non-active cask. So that's where those older casks come in handy. But even then, they usually use like 3rd or 4th fill casks. Yeah. And after that, they just get used up for bookends or whatnot.
And then for like a American bourbon, do they use
Bourbon's
only fresh cask?
Fresh cask
that's
every single
the
time.
rule, right?
Yeah.
And the bourbon is just the name they're allowed to call it, other than whiskey, is how I understand it. It's the same thing, but Americans just call it bourbon for...
Exactly. And speaking of America, that's a really good point, because whilst this is not a whiskey, if it was made in America, it would be.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because America... Well... They don't have a time limit?
They don't have a time limit. It just says aged in oak, and technically, as a new whiskey has just put to the test, that can be under a minute. There's a new whiskey made by Pat's Blue Ribbon, where they age it for a matter of seconds. They literally run it through a cask, and they call it whiskey.
I was wondering if there was any finishing cask. You have it, and then just to run it through something.
Oh yeah, I mean, finishing casks is definitely a thing.
Oh, really?
Where you mature it in one type of cask that might be relatively inert for most of its life, and then for the last 6 months you put it in a different cask that maybe used to hold sherry or used to hold bourbon or something different that's slightly more active and will impart more flavour. But you only want to impart that flavour for 6 months, not 6 years. So you finish it in that cask. You don't mature it for its entire life in it.
Huh.
Yeah. All right, so
interesting.
If this was made in America, would be a whiskey. But because it's made here in Canada, not a whiskey. Round 2. Second whiskey.
So what do they call that then? What would be the proper name? A spirit or?
Yeah, it's a grain spirit.
Grain spirit?
Yeah. That's why they just call it ancient grains. It's not ancient grains whiskey, it's just ancient grain spirit. They just call it ancient grains because it's kind of a new category.
Okay. The next one.
So it's the lighter of the two. This one you probably can stick your whole nose in because this is relatively weak in comparison.
Yes, it has.
Not in quality, in like profile. Although quality.
So this one is the alcohol fumes are much less on this one than the last one.
Mm-hmm.
That's my main thing, is trying to get past that alcohol smell.
Yeah.
I struggle on some of it just because it's all I smell. It just hits me in the face, right? Then I try to back off and.
So this to me smells like English pancakes. And that probably doesn't translate particularly well over here. But in England, the most common toppings for pancakes, or at least where I grew up in England, it's not maple syrup and bacon, it's not Nutella, it's not any of the amazing things we slather on pancakes here. It's simply a thin layer of butter, a sprinkling of sugar, and a squeeze of lemon juice.
I was going to say, I smell lemon in this.
Lemon, absolutely, yeah. But I'm definitely getting a soft sort of cakey note as well, like a Madeira cake or like a cupcake. Yeah, lemon cupcakes.
Yeah. It's very mild.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I haven't tasted anything like that. I've never tasted anything like that.
Which is funny because this is probably the most quintessentially Canadian flavor profile with a twist. This is pretty much what everyone would refer to as a rye in Canada, despite the fact that rye isn't actually the predominant flavor. This is the same kind of style as you would see flavor-wise in Crown Royal, Canadian Club, 40 Creek, those kind of whiskies.
I've had those, I've had Canadian Club before, but, in a period of my life, I didn't care.
No, of course. Most people drink Canadian Club with rye.
I'm not studying it, I'm drinking it and Coke and stuff.
Yeah, Canada Dry and Canadian Club, that's the quintessential partnership there. But this isn't Canadian Club. This is something a little bit more unique and interesting. But it uses the same kind of techniques where Canadian whiskey, as I mentioned before, mash bill, which was the last one, is very, very American. Canadian whiskey, traditionally, you actually distill all of the grains separately, mature them separately, and then blend them afterwards. It's all about the blending in Canadian whiskey. And this is a blend, much in the same way that Black Bottle is a blend. In fact, this is something you very rarely see in Canada. In Black Bottle and most traditional Scottish blends, they're from distilleries across the country. There's probably 20 different distilleries that go into making each blend. This one is only 3 distilleries, but in Canada it's very, very rare to get a whiskey that has spirit from more than one distillery. And I don't even know the full story behind this one, to be honest. It's a little bit wrapped in secrecy. I should go and watch it because I know that the creator of this whiskey actually went on Dragon's Den to pitch this product to the dragons.
Really? I
should look up that episode, yeah. But he was a university student who decided he just wanted to make his own whiskey, but he couldn't afford a distillery or anything. So he got some partners together and got the money together, got a brand, and created this.
It's strange, though. Yeah. I can't put my finger on what. My first words out of my mouth would be like, it's watered down.
It's because it's only 40%.
Right? It's very weak.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like it's compared to the other one and compared to the Black Bottle and the rest of them, like.
Yeah. So do you think this is a whiskey?
Just from how mild it is, I have to say no.
Cool. Is this a whiskey? Well, according to the bottle, no. But at the same time, maybe.
A mystery.
It's a mystery still. This is a product called 12 Barrels. So, interesting story. And actually, I'll read the back label because the story of the name is pretty cool. Oh, well, the story of the origin. So, 12 barrels and a clean landing. I was caught red-handed trying to sneak booze from Dad's liquor cabinet. I couldn't steal it. I couldn't buy it, so I decided to make it. And apparently, he originally made it by just trying to make a brandy out of some cheap wine. That original batch wasn't my best, but I've certainly come a long way. 12 Barrels is inspired by legendary Canuck George Meager, the world champion figure skater and the first to take hockey across the pond to Europe. Growing up, I heard stories about how young George would practice fancy skating on Lake Ontario by jumping over whiskey barrels borrowed from his dad's distillery. Jumping over one barrel wasn't a challenge, but when George lined up 12 barrels, the entire town came out to cheer him on. Just like his dad's whiskey, George cleared all 12 barrels with a smooth finish. With a nod to the Meagher's original 1853 recipe and George's passion for adventure, I created 12 barrels for those who are looking to take that next big leap. Cheers, and thanks for your support. So, I love this product because of the story. The story that he's got going here, not just in branding, but his own personal story, I think is really cool. It's a really pleasant, heartwarming thing. And it's a really, really nice looking label. I think they did well. This isn't actually available in BC, though. I actually picked this up. One of my friends, when they visited Ontario, picked a bottle of this up for me. So thank you, Tyler. And I was really intrigued because I had read, and I can't find the article again now. This isn't allowed to be called whiskey. And you'll notice it doesn't say anywhere that this is a whiskey. It says, find your inner rye spirit, is what it's calling itself. And then says, made with Canadian wheat and rye whiskies. So interestingly, this seems to be that it's not allowed to call itself a whiskey because at the time it wasn't. They weren't 100% sure whether if you blend whiskey from more than one distillery, if you can still call it whiskey in Canadian whiskey law. It was kind of unclear. But on top of that, there's also a problem in that in the recipe it didn't say on the bottle, but the recipe is actually mostly Canadian wheat whiskey, and then Canadian corn whiskey, and then 25% is actually rye whiskey from America. So I believe now the new bottles do say whiskey on them, but if they were to be taken to America, I don't think they would be allowed to be called whiskey.
It's such an interesting tale, right? Like, this is what gets me fascinated about it and why I keep watching the videos is because there's a story behind each bottle.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the story in this is cool, but like the whole whether it's whiskey or not, I'm still very confused. I have no idea whether there's a whiskey. This is, to me, in my head, very much a maybe.
Yeah.
Because this literally doesn't say it's a whiskey on the label. The new label does, but I do know that the original plan was to have it in America as well as Canada. And now the new plan is that it's only a Canadian product. And since that plan came to pass, the new labels do say whiskey. So I'm thinking that the problem is actually with the export, that they couldn't actually have that much American whiskey in it in America for it to still be called a whiskey. So that's my theory. And if you have any other theories, or if you found some article that I couldn't find and you want to point me towards it in the comments, please do let us know, because I am very intrigued by this one. It's really cool. Yeah. Maybe Cole Miller, the creator of this whiskey, happens to see this video and would like to drop in an explanation. But if you are watching, Cole, I think you've done a fantastic job. As a first outing, this is a really cool experience. It's not the kind of whiskey that a lot of our customers who are very Scotch-centric are necessarily going to, find to be the best in the world. But for a purely Canadian-style, interesting whiskey with a really nice story, it drinks well on its own. And honestly, the price is around the same as Canadian Club. So if you do live in Ontario, or I believe Alberta, and you can pick up a bottle of this, please support Cole. I think he's doing a great job, and this probably goes very, very well with Dr. Pepper. Actually, Norm's the connoisseur of soda, so we'll leave that to Norm. Maybe we'll come back and do an episode. We'll have a bunch of different sodas and see which one goes best with whiskey.
I'd be into that. I'm just wondering if with his tale here that he snuck into his dad's booze cabinet, did he pour 12 different bottles in a glass? You know how you used to do that as a kid?
Probably. Nice. So we've had a no, we've had a maybe. It's time for the third and final, possibly whiskey. All right.
What a flavor difference between those two.
Oh, you think that was different? This one's going to blow your mind.
All right. I'm going to have some water for this one.
Whew. And, yeah. This is a bittersweet whiskey for me. Because I absolutely love this whiskey. I think it's really cool, it's really unique, it's really creative. But it's been discontinued.
Oh, really?
You can no longer buy it. So the bottle that I currently have open that we're drinking from right now is the last I'll probably ever have of it.
Oh, wow. Thank you for including me on this one.
You're most welcome.
See, and I don't know if I'm getting used to the alcohol burn now that this one doesn't give me anything of that burn. But I'm going back to the first thought on my thing is like, do you describe like you're walking in a forest?
Oh yeah.
Is that a flavor note? I don't know.
I mean, maybe. Is it a forest where it has just finished raining?
Yeah, like that foresty smell.
Mm-hmm. Because that word is petrichor, the smell of freshly fallen rain. I love that word.
And again the chocolate or the coffee.
Soft minerality. I'm getting orange peel on the nose. A little almond.
Yeah. Again, it smells similar to the first one compared to the middle one.
Mm-hmm.
The middle one was much different smell.
Yeah.
Although when I taste this, it's very mild. It's not.
Well, compared to the first one, it will be simply for the fact that it's not cask strength.
It's very friendly.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting a little, maybe not sage, but maybe thyme, some kind of herbal.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There is I was going to say allspice or something.
Nice, allspice, good call. We need a little ginger as well. So whiskey or not whiskey on this one, no?
I would say this one is.
Mm-hmm. And you would be correct.
Why?
But as far as I know, and there's a bit of a grey spot here. It might be okay in the States, but as far as I know, outside of the States, Canada is the only country in the world where this would be considered a whiskey.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that? What makes this whiskey here but not anywhere else?
So wrapped up in all of the crazy little rules that we have is a little rule. Actually, let's find it. Okay, so here is the official rules for whiskey. Whiskey shall be a potable alcoholic distillate or a mixture of potable alcoholic distillates obtained from a mash of cereal grain or cereal grain products, saccharified by the there's too many chemical words in here, diastase of malt, or by other enzymes, and fermented by the action of yeast or a mixture of yeast and other microorganisms, and, part B, may contain caramel and flavouring. So this is something where it contains flavouring, things that aren't whiskey in the whiskey. And in Canadian whiskey law, you can actually add as much flavouring as you want, so long as, in the eyes of the board of people that make these decisions, the whiskey still predominantly tastes like whiskey.
But that would upset some people, I would think, wouldn't it?
It would. And so I know a lot of people watching this who know of this are probably surprised to hear that you can add as much as you want, because it's very commonly thought of as the 1/11th rule. And that, I believe, is actually only a thing for if you want to export it. If it's a domestic product, you can add as much as you want. But the 1/11th rule is used by pretty much every producer just to make sure that they are well within the realms of not making it, not whiskey flavored anymore. And that is that 1/11th of this is allowed to not be whiskey. So 91%-ish.
Is whiskey.
Yeah.
And then the rest can be whatever flavoring or water.
Exactly.
I don't think water would count, would it?
No, water doesn't count. The flavoring, so you're allowed to add tasteless caramel for coloring. The flavoring actually specifically has to be either a wine or an aged spirit. A spirit that's aged, I believe, for at least 2 years. So in this case, 91% of this, and this is funny math, but 91% of this is a whiskey that is made from 100% rye. 100% rye. And there's not that many places that do that. So rye is a quintessential ingredient for Canadian whiskey. It's one of the things that a lot of people call all Canadian whiskey rye. Despite, actually, there's a whole part of this document that says that you can call it rye, even if there's no rye in it.
Really?
Yeah, which makes no sense. But the main component of this is a whiskey that is 100% rye. So 91% of this is 100% rye whiskey. And 8% of this is actually bourbon from the US. They've flavoured the Canadian whiskey with bourbon. That final 1%, sherry. So instead of using an ex-sherry cask, which is very, very common in whiskey maturation in the traditional areas of Japan, Scotland, and Ireland, they have just forgone that whole step and just dumped some sherry into the mix.
Why not?
Right, it makes sense. I mean, as a purist, the 1/11th rule can kind of ruffle a lot of feathers. But if it's used effectively, can create some really interesting products for a really good price as well. This was like $35 when it was around. It was really inexpensive. I'm really sad that it's gone, to be honest. But yeah, nothing wrong with it. And there's other whiskies that take advantage of the 1/11th rule. For example, Bareface now has one called the Oaxaca edition, which is 91% Canadian whiskey and 9% mezcal from Mexico. But this one is called Alberta Premium Dark Horse.
Go Alberta.
I know, right? This is the hometown hero for you, all right?
I'm from Calgary.
Raising the bar in Canadian whiskey, Dark Horse was crafted for the next generation of whiskey connoisseurs who were ready for a bolder, richer tasting Canadian whiskey. Expertly distilled using our finest Canadian prairie rye grain, Dark Horse is blended at a higher strength with a small pot distilled batch that has been aged and handpicked in charred oak barrels. The result is an ultra-smooth rye whiskey that imparts flavors of vanilla, smoke, sweet oak, and black currant.
I like it.
Yeah, it's good. I'm really sad that it's gone. I really am. But I think it's a fantastic product. I think it was really neat. It was very cool for cocktails. We did this in blind tastings with the Dram Association. It scored, I can't remember the exact score, but it was somewhere around 90. Like, it scored really highly.
Really?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with this this whiskey / not whiskey / whiskey. This one is technically a whiskey. They're allowed to call it a whiskey. Even though I would say, objectively, it is the weirdest of the three.
Really?
Like, this one's not a whiskey because it's too young. This one's not a whiskey because it is too blended. This one is a whiskey despite not all being whiskey.
But this one's blended with all whiskeys.
Yes.
So this one is technically, if you break it all down, it's all whiskey.
The individual
but it's not
components
whiskey,
are whiskey
because it's too much blended.
The individual components are all whiskey, but when you put it together, somehow no longer whiskey.
But this one, yeah.
It's weird, right?
It is weird.
So what is whiskey? Who knows? What isn't whiskey? Well, apparently these two. Yeah. Hopefully that's answered a couple of questions, but probably really didn't answer the big question of what isn't whiskey because, well, hand sanitizer isn't whiskey. Norm's hat isn't whiskey. There's quite a few things that aren't whiskey, to be fair. So maybe next time we'll concentrate on just things that are whiskey. Do you have a particular style or country you'd like to hit in episode 2, Norm?
Episode 2, well, what I would like to do is...
Attack of the Clones?
Attack of the Clones. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking... I'll leave it to your expertise, but I'd like to explore more of the flavor notes that I'm that I'm unfamiliar with.
Okay.
Like the peat is my burning question. Like, what is it?
What is peat?
Like, I know what it is, but what does it taste like?
Okay.
Now, I know that you've given me a sample of peated whiskey before.
Mm-hmm.
It's here at work, so I didn't sit and dwell on it long enough, but I still am confused about what the flavor is. You know?
All right.
And I hear peated whiskey all over the place from watching your videos and other people's videos, and they keep talking about peated whiskey, and I have no idea what you're talking about. Why is it so special? Why do people love this stuff? Why do you want burnt soil in there? I don't know why.
Not everyone does. All right. Then it's decided. Episode 2, check back later on for episode 2, which will all be about peated whiskey. I'll start working on my notes for that. Norm, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Let's clink a butts.
Finish it up.
Mm-hmm.